Hey everybody, how's it going? For the last 6 weeks, I've been the proud user of an e-bike, a Lapierre eZesty. In that time, I've done a lot of riding and I've learnt a lot about the bike. I think it'd be quite a good idea now to share a bit of that with you. As you can hear, it's not easy all the time, just because you've got a motor. So I'm going to talk about the physiological demands, things I've noticed there, how did it affect your training, the practicalities of using the bike, owning the bike, the types of rides that I've done on it, and basically try and cover as much ground as possible, just like I do when I ride the bike. So first things first, why did I ask Lapierre for an e-bike? I've got plenty of fitness. My cross-country bike is about as big a bike as I can handle. Well, I want to get more confident off-road, and I believe riding a bike that inspires confidence helps you feel more confident. So this bike has been the main reason for that. Also, when I'm tired, I'm still going to ride loads of technical trails. And that for me is a bit of a win. So I'm no longer adding fatigue to my body, and I should be resting, stick it in turbo mode, and off I go. One thing's for sure, the more I rode the bike, the more confident I became on it. Which meant it did the job I wanted the bike for, going better, faster on the cross-country bike. Because physiologically speaking, the major difference between riding a bike with a motor, an assist, and a normal mountain bike is the amount of torque that you're asking from your body. So I can ride up here on my cross-country bike, but it's hard. It's a max effort. I'm using a lot of torque, I'm in a big gear, pedaling slowly. If I lose traction, it's going to be very hard to maintain any sort of momentum. But it's using a lot of muscular force. Whereas on this, it's more of an aerobic workout. I'm breathing deeply, use my arms, but I'm not getting into those anaerobic zones, using huge amounts of muscle recruitment to just power the pedals through even the fraction of a pedal stroke. So it's kind of taking the edge off the workout in one way. But because it does that, it means you can maintain the power over the top, keep momentum, stay in an endurance zone, and actually prolong the workload. So whilst it will take the peaks out, if you only rode an e-bike, you would miss out on that part of your training. You'd lose a little bit of max recruitment strength. However, it's going to help build your aerobic capacity. You can probably tell just how deep I'm breathing. It's not easy at all. And that's because these bikes egg you to ride uphill, meaning you're pedaling more of the time as well. So no longer do you go out and just look for easy 5-road climbs. You look for more challenging climbs, and that's adding to your fitness too. Whilst this is my own personal opinion, my own findings, I have also heard this from other people. So I do ride with a few friends that also have e-bikes, and it's quite interesting to see how the rides have changed since they've had their e-bikes compared to when they rode cross-country bikes. So if I was coming up here on my cross-country bike, before I roll in here, I want to have a few deep breaths, whereas now I can just carry on. Effectively, you could probably double the amount of technical training you do in one ride. You might notice I'm doing laps here. So one little observation, a very interesting observation that came from Tristan's dad, Paul, was that if you want to go out and absolutely annihilate yourself on a bike, which sometimes you do, it's actually really hard to do on an e-bike because they assist you so much when you go a lot further than you might expect. So if you do want to go out and completely annihilate yourself, a long travel e-bike like that one probably just isn't the bike for you. I don't know, is 160mm still long travel in the world of mountain biking these days? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I'm at danger of making it look like I only ride on the road at the moment, but one thing that I expected was getting off this, going back onto a normal bike, you'd feel dead legged because all of a sudden you have to carry your own weight, you had no assistance. But because of that cadence I just mentioned, I would say it's almost the opposite. It's almost like riding the turbo trainer in a way, is it makes you feel fast. And that translates really nicely to the cross-country bike, the road bike, any bike you might be riding. That, for me, is enough of a reason to use it on recovery days because it gives you that little leg boost, speed assist. And that's really what you want when you're recovering, is to feel better afterwards. Since I'm here having a bit of a rest, how about the practicalities of owning an e-bike? I think actually it's not really that much different to riding a normal bike. So in the winter, you're probably going to have lights that you want to go and charge. Just think of charging your battery at the same time. It's almost impossible to run out of battery accidentally, unless you're actually in pursuit of the limits of the range, because you've got a little dial on the screen that tells you exactly how much is left as a bar percentage, so every block is 10%. I have run out, but that's because I was simply trying to ride as far as I could, also using the boost modes just to halfway with my teammates basically. So that was kind of good fun. I touched on range a second ago and actually running out of battery. So I was after 58 kilometers of pretty serious off-road, pretty hilly, using the red mode to try and drop Steve and Tristan. That's a few weeks ago now. Probably one of the first rides I did on the bike. The range is said to improve on the bike as it ages, so the factory grease loosens up a little bit within the motor, just little things like that. Whilst it doesn't sound like a lot, it all aids the efficiency. Supposedly, even just changing your tyres to dry weather tyres in the summer will give you more range, which makes sense. Less resistance, less drain on the battery. Otherwise, you're going to need to take the key on this model in particular if you want to access the battery, because you have to turn the motor on and off in the battery. But that's a design nuance of a FAZUA motor. Talking about the FAZUA motor, I haven't done it yet, but you can plug them in and completely tune them, and I'm quite looking forward to messing around with that. Maybe that's something for another day, just to see if it actually makes a difference. So something that I thought would be really quite different with that bike is the type of rides that I'm doing. But actually, I've ended up doing cross-country rides, but on that bike, and then I've carried extra luggage. So I've carried a backpack, some extra food, gone a little bit further than normal perhaps, or just carried it because it doesn't really matter that you've got that extra weight there, so you can carry loads of spares, maybe play around with the setup and the tune of the bike, you know, the shocks, tyres, that sort of thing. That's something that I didn't really expect. I thought I'd be trying to really push it and try and do gnarlier, burlier rides than normal. I've done that a little bit, but nowhere near as much as I thought I would, which I find quite interesting actually. Hopefully that translates well to the cross-country bike. I did ride the cross-country bike the other day actually, and it's, even though riding that with a motor feels incredibly fast, the cross-country bike, being a good 8 kilos lighter, still feels unbelievably quick. So it hasn't sapped any of my fitness, as in cardiovascularly it's still the same. Yeah, you're missing those sort of peaky spikes, the torquey spikes, peaky torquey spikes, when you're going over little rises and things like that, but actually that's not the sort of thing you notice in everyday riding. It might seem like a weird time to mention this, but something I've noticed myself doing on the e-bike as opposed to my cross-country bike is actually just leave the suspension open. On the cross-country bike, I turn it off, lock it out pretty much straight away. As soon as the terrain gets solid, it's a bit smoother, less bumpy, or if it's just uphill. But on this, because it pedals so efficiently, as in you have that assistance, and weirdly you get less pedal bob, and that's probably because you don't have the same dead spot in your pedal stroke, which brings me on to another thing. It's so good for your cadence. You end up spinning much faster than you'd ever expect because you've got that assistance, you've got no dead spot, and it just urges you to pedal all the way around the pedal stroke nice and smoothly and quickly, and I think that's pretty cool. So it's good for leg speed. One of the benefits about the FAZUA motor, which I briefly touched on a second ago, is that it completely disengages, so you don't actually even feel it. So whilst it is a half-powered e-bike, as it were, it's only got 60 Newton meters of max torque, or peak torque, which is still a lot. Bearing in mind the whole system only weighs 4.5 kilos. For a bike rider to produce 60 Newton meters of torque, you're going to be 60, 70 plus kilos. So power to weight wise, it's phenomenal still. And you really notice that when you're pedaling, it gives you a proper buzz. Another thing that I noticed is it doesn't get boring. Like, you don't get used to the fact, I guess it's like having a fast car. It's still fast, but you're always surprised just how fast it is, and I think that's quite entertaining. Maybe one day you get used to it, I'm not sure. Novelty hasn't worn off for me yet, that's for sure. The one thing to note about e-bikes is it's basically just a different discipline of riding a bike. You have to treat it as such. You can't just jump on it thinking it's a mountain bike and riding it like a cross-country bike. It's going to require a little bit more than that, but at the same time, it's still a bike on two wheels. You know, it's not a completely new sport. Discipline, not sport. There you go. That's the main difference. What's it like for core stability or core strength, things like that? Well, when you're riding the bike, it doesn't feel heavy. It's because the weight is down low in the down tube. However, if you're moving the bike around at home, if you're going over stiles and footpaths or riderways, anything like that, if the main gates are locked, then you're going to notice the bike's a bit heavier. But on the whole, to be really honest, it's not going to hold you back ever, the fact that the bike is a few kilos heavier. It's just a nice sort of balance. You know, the fact that it's lighter than a full-on e-bike does make it a little bit more manageable. Lifting it around the shed or the garage, whatever you have, you get used to the fact it's that little bit heavier. And it is a big bike, it's quite a long bike. This is a size large, and that just is another consideration when you're moving it around. This is only intended to be a short video, so let's quickly summarise. Physiologically, you won't lose fitness. If the only bike you have is an e-bike, you can build fitness. You can always ride with the motor off if you really want to increase a little bit of that peak torque power that I've been mentioning. That way, you've all of a sudden got a bit of weight training in there as well. The practicality of owning it is actually really simple. If you're charging rear lights or front lights, you're going to charge that bike. You're not going to run out of battery unless you're trying to, basically. It'd be really, really hard. The only thing you do need to remember is to take the key with you. There's been quite a few rides actually that I've done where I've forgotten to take the key, meaning one of the nuances of the design of this bike is that you have to engage a key, open it up, pull the battery out to turn it on. But because it does pedal well, you quickly forget. And on any given ride, if you haven't got the motor turned on, you'd almost be forgiven for thinking it's not actually an e-bike anyway, as in it doesn't feel bad to pedal. The technical aspects of owning it, as in the trails that I ride, yeah, it's not changed too much. I think ultimately we are the riders we are. We kind of draw ourselves to riding the terrain that we want to ride, no matter what sort of bike we've got. Like most of the rides that I do, I quite happily go and take a cross bike or a gravel type bike with me, just because I like going to those places. I think that's probably the reason I do those rides. If we're going to talk about maintenance and looking after the bike, yeah, I mean, it requires the same as any other bike. It's got suspension, it's got lots of linkages on it, it's got lots of bearings. You just need to take good care of it. It's an expensive bike. You need to look after it for Lapia UK. It's absolutely well worth and really rewarding when you do clean it. I think that's just like any bike, isn't it? If it's clean, then it looks amazing, makes you want to ride it. So for me going forwards, I'm almost certainly just going to continue to use it in the way I have been. As I ride more and more on the road as we get into December, then I'll probably start riding it less, but then using it more for my recovery rides and just getting out and messing around, taking the strain off my legs, but still enjoying a bit of technical training, having a little bit of fun on the descents. So when I first got that bike, there was something I really wanted to do with it. I wanted to go and ride it with someone that had never ridden an e-bike before and was a bit of a skeptic. But actually it seems to be really hard to find someone that hates e-bikes. So if you're in Cornwall and you hate e-bikes, genuinely hate them, come and have a go. You're more than welcome to test it out and let me know your thoughts. But no matter who you are or what you ride, I think it's hard to argue that e-bikes are nothing but brilliant fun. I'd love to know your opinion on them, so drop that down in the comments. Try and stay dry. I'm going to go enjoy the rest of my ride, find a few more descents, and get ready for a night ride later on. Oh, wrong line. That's better. Thank you for watching. It'd be mega if you would give it a thumbs up or a subscribe. I'll see you again another time.